Issei would help Asia to her feet. The young girl was new to town. She had recently been assigned here as the new church's nun. She was kind and sweet. Issei took a great liking to her. She was like a ray of sunshine. As they walked through the town, Issei decided that he would help her find where she needed to go. After all, he had some time before school started, and if he was really going to be late, he had the speed to get there, just naturally. As they walked, Issei would learn a little bit about Asya, about how she had grown up in the way of the church, and how she had been serving as a nun her life. Issei even got to witness one of her miracles, as she helped heal a young boy who had hurt his leg when he fell on the sidewalk. Eventually, as they made their way to the bottom of the hill, where the church resided at the top, Issei felt a strange phenomena. He felt his skin crawl. Even from this distance, it was like if he got any closer, he'd be in danger. Of course, Issei didn't plan on going that far anyway, and Asya would thank him for his help, as they went their separate ways, and Issei went to school. As he convened with Rias, he would learn why he felt the way that he did, and she explained that it would be wise of him not to go near that nun or near the church, as it was considered enemy territory for the devils, and as such, a place where a devil may face one of its many weaknesses. Asides that being the power of pure light, it was also the face of pure erasure, or permanent exorcism, something that even the strongest of devils cannot come back from. Of course, that left Issei a bit more worried and concerned, but he was learning to get used to that. There was still also the matter of Rachel. He hadn't been seeing her in school, at least not as much, ever since he had spoken to the entity that was now intertwined with the back of his spine. And even then, the scarab didn't really speak very much, no matter how many times Issei tried to command it. It was like the thing had a life of its own. It only chose to speak when it felt like it wanted to, and not a moment before, and not a moment after. For Issei, he felt like he was in an endless rut. He wasn't sure of what he was supposed to do. He decided to go to the museum. That was where all this mess started in the first place. As he found himself in the Egyptian exhibit, he was looking upon the tomb of the goddess Capri, the Beetle god. Just why? Why was I chosen? Why me of all people? I wonder the same thing myself. What the? So now you want to speak? Be mindful of your words, mortal. What you're standing before is unholy. It's only holy to you. I don't really believe in your God very much. All the same, I won't tolerate your disrespect. The god Capri, one who believes in the light and the rebirth. She is the one that watched over us. Us? Yes. There were many of us long ago, my brothers and sisters. However, after the great cataclysm and tragedy, there is only but me that remains. She sacrificed herself to protect us, our spirits, even though we lie dormant, even if we die. Her spirit of rebirth lives in us all. That is how I am reborn. Although, how I was reborn into you, I do not know. Look, I already understand you don't like being attached to me. Well, if it makes it feel any better, I don't really like having you here all that much either. If it were up to me, I'd rip you out right now. But you'd end up taking my spine along with it. I couldn't agree more. There's no valor in you, nothing redeemable. You're just a lecherous human. The warriors I fought beside were ones of high honor and praise. Well, if you want to leave, there's nothing stopping you. But there is. When I am reborn, I am permanently bonded to my host, whether I like it or not. And I'll have you know, it's only because of her will that I stay here. If it wasn't for that, I'd rip myself from you personally, and I don't care if you bled to death. I wouldn't care either. It's a lot better than being stuck with the likes of you. You're all the same. I can't believe I had to be resummoned by that woman. What? The red-haired girl. She's the reason you were brought back. Wait, does that mean you could have saved me? And you chose not to? If you didn't have the strength to fight them off, then why should I extend my energies to save you? Issei was now officially pissed. The Scarab had basically confirmed that he could have revived Issei from his fight with the three fallen angels, if it wanted to. But rather than do that, it was more than willing to let Issei die and be reborn again. Issei, he was angry. The fact that this thing on his back talked down to him the way that it did, the way it acted all high and mighty. He didn't ask for this. He didn't ask to be in this situation. He didn't ask for any of these problems. But problems always seem to have a way of finding him. All the same, Issei figured he wasn't going to get any answers and was leaving when he got a call on his phone from Rias, telling him to meet her at a specific location. As he arrived, he would see the other members of the House of Grimmery as they made their way inside of the abandoned warehouse. Rias wanted to show Issei many of the aspects of what they do, including finding stray devils. If there was one thing that Issei was coming to learn, it was that the world that he had lived in, a world that was often considered black and white, was actually a world filled with gray, and things never went as simply as you might think. For example, despite being a part of what many would consider to be the bad side, ultimately devils, fallen angels, or any creature for that matter, anything was capable of doing great good or great evil if given a chance. Among the many things that the House of Grimmery took care of in this town, it was making sure that stray devils didn't cause problems. Also, this was a chance for Issei to see what the other members of the household could do. First, there was Kiba, with his sacred gear being Sword Burst, allowing him to create a multitude of swords, any that suited his fancy. He had the power of the knight. As such, he had immense speed and stamina. Next was Koneko. She possessed the power of the rook, ultimate strength and ultimate defense. She was more or less the powerhouse. Then there was Akano, the queen, the most balanced of all of the powers in the House of Grimmery. Like a chessboard, the queen had free range to do almost anything. And Rias herself was the king, the one that commanded them all. While the king is powerful, the king can only be as powerful as the pieces that serve under it. Of course, Issei was familiar with the terms of chess and how the pieces operated. But even still, he wondered what piece that left for him. Just what was he exactly? As he watched as the others fought against the stray devil, and as it was soundly defeated, Issei would learn that the piece he had been given was the pawn. Of course, as if his morale couldn't be lowered any further, he was given the pawn, the weakest piece on the board. A piece that was, well, frankly, the butt of all jokes. Now granted, Issei never stopped to consider the true power of a pawn, but even still, pawns are often considered to be a derogatory term, at least in the sense of how pawns are often treated. little more than foot soldiers to be used and manipulated by those higher above them. Of course, Rias never saw it that way, but for Issei, he couldn't help but feel that way. I mean, it was as if everything was kicking him down in every which direction. First, there was Rainier. Then, there was this Beetle thing on his back that made it very clear how he felt about him, and now finally being a part of the House of Grimmery. Even with his powers, he still couldn't use them fully. The best thing he could do was armor up both of his arms and create a few basic weapons, but even then, he wasn't a skilled fighter. He had never trained to fight a day in his life, so he had no idea what he was doing. Practically a fish out of water, so to speak. Of course, Rias tried to get Issei to see the brighter side of things, but in his situation, it was rather difficult. One night, as Issei had finished fulfilling a contract, he found himself walking back home. Sure, he could have used his enhanced speed to get there faster, but he wasn't in any rush. The night sky looming over him. He was just deep in thought. What exactly was he supposed to do? Why had he been chosen? These were things he still didn't know. However, as he found himself being lost more and more in the own sea that was his mind, his senses would be heightened, as he could smell something. It was coming from a house a few blocks away. Issei wasn't sure why, but he had an inkling to check it out. As he made his way there, there was a distinct sound. It sounded like gunfire, the swinging of a sword, the sounds of energy beams going off. Of course, he had no way of knowing what was going on, but he felt like he needed to figure it out. Issei would make his way to the household. The door was already open, and inside, the loud crashing and banging of a whole bunch of furniture could be heard. Issei went running in immediately, going into a dimly lit room as he saw two figures moving at almost blinding speeds. One shimmering like light, and the other one like darkness, and a young girl cowering in the corner. There seemed to be a figure, one that was hooded. Making her out was a lot difficult than one might think, and the other was an older man with white hair, in what seemed to be like priestly or regal attire, as he held a sword and a gun. The girl raised up her hands, as shadows seemingly appeared, taking the form of a dark shield, blocking her. You can't do that forever. My associates told me that finding you was going to be difficult, but I think that they were wrong. So why don't you do us all a favor and die, bitch? It'll be easier that way. We don't want another cataclysm on our hands. I will not fall to you. Azarat, Metreon, Zinthos! Immediately, dark tendrils would form. However, the man was able to cut them down with his sword of light. And you're not all that strong either. As Issei ran in, he was trying to figure out what was going on. The cloaked girl would look over to Issei, and you could almost swear that her heart dropped. It couldn't be. Why was he here? Oh, so you have picked a side. We knew it. You'd pick those devils. What? What's going on here? Who the heck are you? Oh, it doesn't really matter. You're all gonna be burning in hell soon enough. The man pointed his gun towards Issei, shooting at him. Issei's right arm formed a shield, blocking the bullets. As he backed away, his left arm would then take the form of a sword. As the armed now warrior was preparing for battle, Fried would start to get a bit annoyed. So, He's got another one of those sacred gears too. This might be difficult after all. Should probably call for backup, but even still. You need to run. What are you doing here? I could say the same thing to you, whoever you are. I mean, why are you fighting this guy? What's the meaning of all this? You don't recognize her? What? You want to speak now of all times? How do you know her, if I don't? Look closer. The girl would slowly remove her hood, revealing herself to be Rachel. Rachel? Rachel? Asya? What? You all know each other now? Oh, this truly is annoying. Alright, who the heck is he? The name's Freed. Freed Selzen, at your service. Lovely priest and dangerous exorcist. With my holy bullets of truth and my sword of light, I cut down the wicked. Thus says the holy man. And it's safe to say, you all are in cahoots. Well, no matter. You thought you were going to get the drop on old Freed, huh? Well, now it's time to turn those tides. Freed would immediately switch his tactics, shooting towards Rachel as she blocked the bullets once more. Issei went in for a strike with his blade, however Freed was able to match him, kicking him away instantly before swinging around and slicing towards her once again. Asya couldn't make sense of what was going on. Why was Rachel here? Why was Issei here? Why were they fighting? Of course, everything would be revealed in due time. Freed, deciding that ripping off the band-aid was the much more appropriate term. He revealed that Issei's origin was actually of that of a devil. He could smell it on him. And that Rachel was no better. Although, for Rachel, it wasn't entirely like that. Was she a devil? One could argue yes. One could argue no. Her origins were a lot more complicated than one might think. And for Issei, it didn't make things better that he was fighting against someone who was experienced in killing devils, as he found himself catching a bullet to the kneecap and the sword of light being slashed on his back. The scarab was truly living to his word. He really wasn't helping Issei in his moment of need. He wasn't sure of what he could do. He wasn't sure of what he should do. However, backup would show up unexpectedly, as a portal would open instantly and the other members of the House of Grimry would step forward. As they could sense Issei's distress, they came to his side immediately, and just in time, as facing off against an exorcist was easier said than done, a vulgar one at that. Although Asya, she would be the most shell-shocked of all. The fact that her friend Rachel was actually a devil? But that didn't make any sense. And even more so, why were they all here now? Of course, Freed threatening her life didn't help matters either. And the situation only got more complicated when Konako alerted everyone that a multitude of fallen angels was showing up at their direction. Issei didn't want to leave. He wanted to save Asya and Rachel. He wanted to try to figure everything out. However, he wasn't given the chance. Rias would call for the retreat immediately, and everyone of her household would be teleported from danger. As Issei looked and reached out, the last thing he saw was Asya, Rachel moving over to defend her and telling Issei not to come following them. The house would cave in, a multitude of fallen angels descending, Freed preparing for his next volley of assault, as the fight was continuing. Issei would slowly black out from the blood loss, unaware of his faculties or his surroundings, as the situation had officially changed. Issei awoke and found themselves in the arms of Rias. She had healed the wounds on his body. They weren't too severe, but if left untreated, they could have been far worse. Issei had never felt so useless in his life. All this power, and yet he couldn't use it when it mattered most. Rias would try to console him, explaining that for someone like him to be put in this situation, it was only natural that he'd have a hard time getting the hang of things. After all, until a short while ago, he had no idea that gods, devils, angels, fallen angels, and all these other things even existed. He was living a normal high school life, and through no fault of his own, he had found himself dragged into a situation that he was not prepared for. But still, it didn't make him feel any better. He asked about the whereabouts of Issei and Rachel. However, Rias could not confirm it. Rachel had not shown up for school, and while she had been doing her due diligence to try to find her, it was easier said than done. That's when Issei had to ask, what was it about Rachel? Why were people so worried or concerned about her? Rias knew that she would have to explain to him eventually, so it was better to do it now. The reason why Rachel was a priority for everyone was because she was a half-human, half-devil hybrid. No one knows of her true origins or where she came from, but only that she has a swelling of untapped potential. Potential that can cause great harm to the world if not kept in check. Rias being here was not just to watch over this town or just for her education, but it was to watch over her. Issei wondered if it were akin to a jailer watching over a prisoner, but it wasn't anything like that. As far as Rias was concerned, Rachel was free to go and do whatever she pleased. She had no jurisdiction to try to hold her anywhere. The only thing she could do was watch over the girl while she lived in this area. As such, she also made sure that if there were any others who might have been after her, to keep them off of her trail. Not that many had shown up until now. But then there was the matter of Issei, and this is where Rias had to be firm with Issei. Issei was a member of the church, and there was no telling where her allegiance would be with the fallen angels. Even if she wasn't on their side, helping Issei was something that might be out of their hands. Of course, Issei didn't see it like that. However, Rias would warn him the dangers of going near Issei and that church. She also explained to him about the promotion system, about how in certain areas a pawn, when in what's deemed as enemy territory, can promote themselves. As such, the pawn was not weak, but was in fact actually a strong piece on the board. Still, Issei found a hard time believing that, and while Rias would have wanted to talk to him further, there were other things she had to attend to. For now, Issei just went home. There wasn't really much else that he could do at the moment. He decided that he'd just take a day to himself, maybe walk around, clear his head. As he did so, stopping into a diner to get something to eat, he looked over to the back booth, and surprisingly enough, the last person he expected to see was there. It was Rachel. Before she could leave, Issei would make it over to the table, sitting down immediately. Rachel had no way of getting out of it, so it meant the two of them were going to have to talk this out. First, she wanted to know how much Issei knew, especially if he was hanging around Grimmery. Wait, you know what Rias is? Of course I do. It was easy for me to figure out. And you're okay with that? It's not like she's done anything to me, although I can tell that she was sent to watch over me, to make sure that everything goes smoothly. Well, so much for that. But how much do you know? How much do I know? I don't even know how I got into this situation. It all started at that field trip. The field trip? All the way back then? Yeah, I went into the Egyptian exhibit, and while I was there, I somehow got possessed by an Egyptian god? Egyptian god? Yeah, the Beetle god. Capri. Wait, so you mean to say that you've made contact with Capri? Kinda. I saw some images of Egypt. A whole lot flashed into my head. I passed out, and then I woke up. And then the next thing you know, I'm learning that I have this thing on my back. Thing on your back? Yeah, I'll show you later. It's called a scarab or something. Rachel couldn't believe it. She had heard about the scarab from legend, but the idea that Issei actually had one? Well, this was really a shock. But now it was her turn. He wanted to know where Rachel fits in all of this. Why was she the center of everyone's attention? And she had no choice but to explain. She would tell Issei her story. How her mother, long ago, got caught up in some cult business, and, through no fault of her own, she found herself being the daughter of a human mother and of an ancient devil. A being that went by the name of Trigon. Trigon. Yeah, he was one of the older devil kings. He was a tyrant, ruthless. He was so potent and evil that even his own people had to turn against him. It took the efforts of all mystic beings known to man to seal him away. Wait, if he was sealed, then how, did he and your mother kind of bump uglies? It was a part of the ritual my mother got herself into. The ritual allowed for a human to be used as a conduit, as a host for where my father could temporarily use it, despite being sealed far off in another dimension. As such, he ended up impregnating my mother, and that's how I was born. The host ended up dying once the ritual was over, but he had gotten what he wanted. A flesh firstborn. A child. But what would even be the point of having a child? Having a child, Issei, makes a much better conduit. So does that mean he wants to use you? Essentially, you could say that in terms of getting out from where he's sealed, it's easier said than done. Even for someone as strong as him, the seal's doing a pretty good job of keeping him in place. However, I'm the tiny fragment of him that's released into this world. I'm virtually just a doorway, a glorified entrance for him to come into the mortal realm. I see. So that's why you've been on the run, yeah? I don't have any family, and this isn't the first school I've been to. I've been all over, from the UK to the US, even some parts of Africa. I found myself here in Japan. I had hoped that maybe if I could stay isolated, keep myself under control, then he'd never have a way of getting out of me. I used to have a home, but it's gone now. A home? They were the people of Azarath. They were a calm and collective race. It was where my mother had hidden with me, but my father temporarily caused chaos there, and I didn't really have much of a home. Then how do you know Asya? Well, throughout my travels, I found shelter in a temporary monastery where there were young nuns in training. I met Asya and we became friends. However, Asya, she was bound for a lot of great things. As for me, even if it wasn't all out, they could sense the evil. They could sense it festering. I knew if I stayed I'd only cause trouble, so I just left. And you don't have anyone else here that can help you? No, not likely. Helping me would be a lot more trouble than it's worth. It's not just fallen angels or angels that would want me dead, Issei. There are devils that would want me dead as well. Being the daughter of one of the old devil kings, I could be seen as a potential rival in that regard. And since they might view me as being unhinged and unstable, the easiest thing to do would simply be to off me before I become a problem. As Issei heard this, his heart was moved. She had been running for so long. If there was anything that he could do to help, he knew he wanted to. Right now, their only focus was finding Asya and saving her. Although, that wouldn't be all that hard. As when they were leaving the diner, and preparing to just walk around and just get things off of their chests, as they crossed the parkway, they would actually see someone sitting on a bench that looked rather familiar. It was Asya. The two ran over to her immediately, grateful that she was okay. Of course, Asya had managed to escape in the chaos, but she had nowhere to go. But mainly, she was just happy to see Rachel again. Even though they hadn't known each other for long, when they had been together at the monastery, they had become close as friends, and Asya missed her. She was happy that they could reunite, and she didn't care that they were devils. To her, they were good people. Not like the ones that she had worked with, the ones that threw her away and betrayed her. Of course, as Issei was happy that the two friends had reunited, he still had a danger sense about him, as immediately the group found themselves surrounded, and leading them was none other than Rainier. Of course, Issei was not too thrilled about seeing her, and Rainier was all too happy to rub it in, like pouring salt into the wound. As the group found themselves surrounded by fallen angels, Rainier made it very clear who she was after: Asya. Of course, they weren't going to just hand her over willingly, but Rainier made sure that she would see things done her way, as the multitude of fallen angels would start to attack them from every direction. Issei trying his best to dodge and fight for his life, while Rachel in the meanwhile used her own magic to fight off against them. This leaving Asya free for the taking, as Rainier appeared next to her and grabbed her. Asya didn't want her friends to get into any trouble, and she didn't want them to risk their lives for her sake. As such, Asya complied to go willingly, if it meant that her friends would be spared. Of course, Rainier was all too eager to accept the deal, seeing the pained look on Issei's face as they vanished. For Issei and Rachel, this was the worst case scenario. They knew they had to find Asya, and fast. Issei would make his way back to the school, heading to the occult research club and telling them of what had happened. While Rias was concerned, she still did not want Issei to go after her. However, Issei knew that he couldn't turn this away. If no one was going to help her, he was. And Rachel already had plans on going. Rhea saw that she couldn't persuade or get them to change their minds, although she warned that whatever trouble they got into, she wasn't going to be getting them out of it. Before anything else could be said, both she and Akano would have to leave. Of course, Issei was more than willing, and Rachel, the two figured that they could handle themselves well enough. However, Kiba and Koneko would also offer to help them. Issei was a member of their household, so they couldn't leave him hanging, and she never said that they couldn't tag along, and they weren't about to let one of their own go into a fight with a handicap. Issei was grateful for the help, and the four would make their way to the town church. As they made their way inside, Issei would remember the promotion system, as Kiba would remind him. And he would test it out, promoting himself to Rook, boosting up his defense as that was needed. The four would find themselves being confronted by Freeze, who didn't like his chances of winning this time around, especially against 4 devil scum. While he tried to fight them off, ultimately he'd have no choice but to retreat, leaving the group to focus on their main task. Heading under the altar into an underground passage, they would find the Congress of Fallen Angels, as the ritual had already been performed. Asuya found herself tied up and helpless, as her power had been taken from her. Her sacred gear, Twilight Healing, and Rainier had claimed it for herself. Kiba and Koneko would fight off the horde of fallen angels, as Issei and Rachel would rush over to Asuya's side. Rainier couldn't help but taunt the two of them. It was just within her nature to do so. For Issei even more, because she just found it pathetic. Issei always trying to swoop in, always trying to be the hero, even though it never worked out in his favor. As they found themselves being overrun, Issei would evacuate with Asuya's body, as the life slowly faded from her. You see, taking away someone's sacred gear was akin to taking away their life force, and in doing so, Asuya found herself on her deathbed. As Issei found himself being overwhelmed with emotion, the guilt of failure and loss eating at his own soul, there was a strong surge of anger and rage. As just on the outside, Rainier found herself confronted by Rachel. You want to join your friend? Even though my orders weren't to go after you, don't think we don't know who you are, daughter of Trigon. It would serve us well if you were done away with, and with the power of Twilight Healing on my side, I have more than enough power to take down a would-be devil like you. I don't give a damn who your daddy is. If you want to fight, you can get one, but you're not gonna like it. Rachel said nothing, as a dark aura formed around her. Not too far off, Rias and Akano had finished dealing with Rainier's followers, Donasik, Carl Warner, and Ratelt, and they could feel the ominous aura that was starting to ooze all throughout the forest. As they made their way, Issei could feel as if the earth itself was starting to shake from under him. Kiba and Koneko followed close behind. As they made their way outside, they could see where the darkness was coming from. Rachel's skin had turned a dark red, and she had seemed to sprout not one set, but 2 sets of glowing yellow eyes. Rainier would be overcome with fear. Even for nighttime, the sky was surprisingly dark. She felt herself being trapped in a dark void that she couldn't escape. You will pay Azarath, Metreon, Zentos! Immediately, the dark raven would form, with its 4 ominous eyes. Rainier would attempt to fight it off with a spear of light, but it did nothing, the light only being swallowed by the darkness. As the dark ravens swarmed around her, enveloping her, Rainier would find herself suffering an excruciating and painful death as she was ripped and pulled apart. The scene was gruesome and gory. What was left of Rainier, if you could even call it that, was a mutilated carcass, as it found itself being swallowed by the dark bird. Even still, Rachel couldn't bring herself under control. She had allowed herself to lose it. Rias would then appear, as she told everyone in her household to stand back. Rachel, I understand you are feeling pain and loss, but you must get a hold of yourself. Gremory. Yes. Although I must say, I doubt that I'm talking to Rachel at the moment, am I? Shut up! You... It seems I'll have to put you down. Issei watched on as a multitude of red circles formed around Rachel. Rias, using her power, would envelop and stun her, forcing the darkness to subside, rendering her unconscious, and bringing Rachel's own faculties back to the forefront. Honestly, Issei was very impressed. However, Akino would point out that Rias was the sister to the Devil King, and her power, the Crimson Power of Destruction, was not something that should be taken lightly. If she wanted to, she could have actually killed her, but at most, this was just to get her back under control. Once everyone was brought back inside, and with the enemy being dealt with, there was still the matter of Asya, whose life had been lost. However, even still, there was a way she could be brought back. Rias would reveal that she hadn't used all of her evil pieces just yet, and just like she could do for Issei, she could have Asya reborn, and she would use the power of the bishop. With Asya having her sacred gear restored, something like Twilight Healing would be perfect for the House of Gremory. Everyone watched as the bishop piece was placed inside of her, and Asya would be reborn back to life, although she would now be that of a devil. Of course, everyone was happy, especially Issei, and as Rachel slowly came to, she was overcome with a sense of relief to see that her old friend was safe and sound. Asya was happy to be brought back as well, and to be back with her friends. Of course, there was still the matter of what to do with Rachel exactly. That little incident showed just what she could be capable of doing. If that was just a fragment of Trigon's power, then that wasn't something to take lightly. Even though Rias wouldn't let it be shown by her own expression, she was a bit fearful. She had known about Rachel's condition, but she had no idea that it could be this severe if she lost control. Even with all of her strength, it wasn't easy keeping it in check, and she still had a long ways to go before she could truly hit her prime when it came to power. Right now, she had the advantage, but it wasn't by much. Of course, for Rachel, she wasn't sure of what she should do now. Maybe leaving would be the best option. Whenever a situation like this occurred, it was only bound to attract more and more from the shadows. However, Asya didn't want her to leave, She wanted her to stay, if possible, and Issei didn't want her to go either. She didn't have to keep running. She had friends, at least he and Asya at least. If she wanted to, they'd help her in any way that they could. Of course, Rachel wasn't fond of running, but still, what if she lost control again? She'd be putting this town and everyone else at risk. However, this is where Rias would interject. She would offer Rachel a spot in her household. If she joined, then her power could be kept in control. At the very least, it would be Rias that would have to watch over her. Of course, though, Rachel wasn't really too fond of this. Even though she didn't have anything against the House of Grimmery per se, the idea of joining a household, being in subject, she wasn't really too keen on it. However, Rias would tell her that the offer would stand if she changed her mind, and if not, she could still join the Occult Research Club and be a part of their friend group. If she needed help, they were more than willing to offer it. As she thought it over, she decided that maybe that was the best thing to do for now. She would let things play out, see if she liked it or not, and if she did, she'd join, and if not, then she'd have every right not to. Eventually, Asya would be enrolled into Kuo Academy, and Rachel would start to return to class again. The two girls finding themselves in the same classroom, and with Issei no less. Along with that, both Rachel and Asya would be welcomed. Even though she wasn't keen on joining the household, at the very least, she would allow them to call her by another name. A name she only gave to those she considered to be her friends. That name being Raven.